Football is not just the world's most popular sport, but it can also be, and indeed is, for a lot of countries, a propaganda tool for the regime, or at the very least, a release valve of social tensions. And this is true regardless of whether a country is a democracy or an autocratic regime. And China is trying to find this out as well, but unfortunately for them, for some reason, they don't seem to be able to make it work. Now, why is that? I don't know. Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Propaganda Basement. Alright, so before we talk about football, and we will talk quite a bit about football because there is something quite important to talk about, let's first look at the other old stories that the edition for this episode of China Daily, July 14th to 20th, 2023, proposes to us. So it's mostly old stories. Expansionist NATO poses danger to world peace. So again, this was almost 2 years ago. Somehow that didn't change much. Digital tech gives buyers a bigger say in the design features of their purchases. So more techno-optimistic propaganda. NATO lie of China threat slammed. The US-led military alliance must shed its Cold War mentality and stop expansionism, Beijing says. Yeah, says Beijing while touting the exact same type of Cold War rhetoric with itself as the Soviet Union. So there's that. Speaking of old stories, remember when World War III was going to start because the US gave cluster bombs to Ukraine? There you go. Russia warns US over cluster bombs. Cambodia and Laos oppose possible supply to Ukraine of weapons still ravaging their countries. Now, we're going to discuss quite a bit about this, or probably by the time I'm publishing this video, I already did the Southeast Asia series about how this is the case in Cambodia, and I think I already published about how the situation looks like in Laos. Nevertheless, at that time when this was being published, the discussion was that it will be a very severe escalation, possibly World War III, dun dun dun, if cluster bombs are supplied to Ukraine. Now, of course, let's all ignore the fact that Russia had been using those since day one of their escalation in Ukraine, but of course, let's not talk about that. Nevertheless, of course, World War III did not start. Cluster bombs did turn up in Ukraine on the Ukrainian side, because again, on the Russian side, they had been a thing since day one. So there's that. Okay, one more thing, and then we can move straight to football. There you go. Officials did highlight the need to cross-cultural bonds as built over many decades by friends of Kuliang in Fuzhou. And now, of course, this article that talks about artistic cooperation between China and the US doesn't tell you about the censorship that China subjects American products to. Censorship with which Hollywood is much obliged to. Hollywood is very happy to acquiesce to the censorship demands of the CCP because of the sweet money that comes from that market, and it's one of the many reasons why Chinese propaganda is so successful, even when it is pretty amateurish, dare I say cartoonish, because there's plenty of financial interest behind it. So yeah, peak China narratives misplaced. There is popular Western perception that China's continuous rise is no longer unstoppable due to markedly slower growth rates, rapidly aging demographics, semiconductor bottlenecks, allegedly more constrained innovative capacity, feeble productivity increases, and more hostile external geopolitics. The article in The Economist on May 11th asked that is Chinese power about to peak, highlighting Goldman Sachs' much lowered expectation of China's economy overtaking that of the United States by 2035, as well as a gloomier forecast by Capital Economics, a research firm, that China may never be able to overtake the US economy and that it would instead peak at 90% of the size of the US economy by 2035. As China has 4 times the population of the US, this pessimism presupposes that China's per capita productivity will never exceed 1/4 that of the US. The Economist flagged up without agreeing the alarmist warning of US academics Hal Bruns and Michael Beckley that a peak China that is facing decay may well go to war to unify with Taiwan preemptively before it's too late, regardless of the 3 white papers reaffirming Beijing's preference for peaceful unification. Drama aside, these peak China musings are wide off the mark. It is only natural that much larger and more mature economies beget more moderate growth rates. Just look at the advanced Western economies, including the US. After decades of breakneck GDP growth that was once described as unstable, unbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable, China has been pursuing higher quality, socially equitable, and ecologically sustainable growth. That's what you say when you're in deep shit. With an imperative for common prosperity, China's people-based governance is geared towards realizing the well-being of the 99% instead of the 1% elite, as in some advanced countries. Yeah, that's why the number of millionaires rises up really fast, whereas the abject poverty stays relatively constant, of course. Worsening demographics are a real challenge. However, about 1/3 of the 150 million Chinese people aged 60 to 69 continue to work, as China's life expectancy has vastly improved. Relaxing China's mandatory retirement age is already on the cards, as are greater financial incentives, childcare facilities, and other child-raising and educational benefits. Yeah, that's why China's fertility is where statisticians said it would be possible only in theory, right? Okay, of course. Instead of labor intensity, China's productivity is increasingly being driven by factory robotics, extensive farming mechanization, and ubiquitous digitalization. Yes, in 5 or 6 cities, the rest of the country not so much. As for innovative capacity, an Australian Strategic Policy Institute report said on March 3 that China is leading in 37 of the 44 critical technologies evaluated, often producing more than 5 times as much high-impact research as its closest competitor, the United States. Yeah, if that were true, we would notice it in patent submissions, wouldn't we? No? Okay. Among the categories of critical technologies, China dominates in all the subsectors in advanced materials and manufacturing, energy and environment, and photonic sensing, timing and navigation. It has a substantial lead in the categories of artificial intelligence, computing and communications, quantum computing. So this is basically a list of the next techno-optimistic grifts that you will see popping up online. So quantum computing, cryptography, communications and sensors, biotechnology, gene technology. I wouldn't be very proud to announce this, CCP. And vaccines and defense, space, robotics, and transportation. Well, I guess only when compared to Russia. Nevertheless, if the peak China narratives are misplaced, then why do the numbers for 2023 look worse than the previous ones, and why do the numbers for 2024, again the official ones, so the sanitized ones produced by the CCP itself, look worse than the previous ones? I don't know, I'm just saying, maybe we do have a problem there, don't we? Anyway, let's go straight to this, because this is the main topic, football. So sports steeled for a big challenge. Team China's youthful squad aims to build an on-Asian title with strong show at Women's World Cup. Primed to face Euro 2022 champion England and highly rated Denmark, Team China is under no illusions about the massive challenges that await at the forthcoming FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. Okay, long story short, this article was written just prior to the tournament. At the tournament, the CCP squad managed to lose all three games: 1-0 to Denmark, 1-0 1-0 they won against Haiti, and then lost against England 6-1. So even with a group that was purposefully engineered for them, so affirmative action at every level, affirmative action at prioritizing women's football over men's football, because men's football sucked badly in China in the last 20 something years, since their last and only qualification to the World Cup in 2002. So affirmative action at home, affirmative action at club level, affirmative action in the seeding for the preliminary matches, affirmative action at the final tournament itself, and they still failed. Now, you would say, well, why is that so important? Well, because football is not just an instrument of entertainment. It can also be an instrument that can work in favor of the regime. And this has been true time and time again over the last 50 or 60 years. I mean, there was a reason the Soviet Union invested so much in football, and to be fair, the national squad of the Soviet Union was nothing short of amazing. And the reason they did that was precisely for the same reason. It can be a release valve. Most of the negative energies in society can be safely manifested in a physically contained environment, that is to say, the stadium, rather than have them blow up in the streets. And by blow up in the streets, I mean that quite literally. Wars have started as a result of a football match, so it is in fact a very good idea, regardless of whether we talk democracies or dictatorships or autocratic regimes, to have these things contained and have these things well managed. The thing is that in China they have failed to do that. And one of the reasons is because there is this inherent limitation to the Chinese model, which tries its best to have both some sort of free market economics, some sort of capitalism, but everything well organized and directed by the state. And the CCP tries to do these things in other fields as well. The problem is that you can't do that with football. I mean, you can try, but most of the times you will fail. China at some point had started to develop some very interesting internal squads. The internal championship of China was starting to actually have some value. Chinese clubs started no longer being the worst ranked in the Asian Champions League. But then it suddenly stopped, and the reason it suddenly stopped is because some of the clubs started acquiring their own identity and therefore their own ultras, that is to say their hooligans, as the Brits would put it. Not very different to what you see in Europe, everywhere in Europe really, including more autocratic places like Belarus or Russia. But the state in China was scared of that. They didn't like it. So most of those clubs were pretty much abolished, reset overnight. The foreign players who were bringing in the performance summarily fired and sent back home. And that was it. That was the end of the local club performance for Chinese clubs. And then they went back to the old-fashioned amateur football, which doesn't actually produce international performance. And then they tried to recreate that energy, but in a more directed way, in a more contained way, under the careful watch of the party. And, well, here we are several years later. So what I was telling you stopped around 2017, 2018. So here we are 7 years later, it still doesn't work. So one lesson that the CCP hasn't been able to draw from this is that you cannot do a state policy on how people like football and how they support their favorite squad and how they organize. You need a certain degree, not even a very high degree, but a modicum of freedom in how these things work. In the Soviet Union and in the Eastern Bloc countries, the state would sometimes crack down on ultras groups, especially when they would be excessively impolite with the regime, but only then. They would not try to meddle that much in how those people organized in supporting their favorite squads, because the regimes in the Soviet Union and in the Eastern Bloc, and then later on pretty much everywhere else, and eventually were forced to understand that if you want football to serve as positive propaganda for your regime and for your country, you have to also cede some territory on social control. Again, this is not exclusive to communist regimes. This happened in the West as well. Let's remember the incidents in the 80s with I think it was Liverpool fans who basically demolished the stadium. Again, at the European Cup final in Amsterdam against Juventus, if I recall correctly. And even then, the first impetus was, yeah, let's get the state in and try to regulate these things. And they tried that for a few years. And in the end, they also had to withdraw once again and only regulate the external actions of the ultras groups, and just basically, guys, be nice, please don't kill people. But other than that, they had to leave them alone if they want to continue to be important for not just for the regime, this time in Britain, but also for social cohesion. I mean, these kinds of things matter quite a bit in dare I say, keeping the youth in check. Now, it seems that the CCP has reached the conclusion that they don't have to do these things, that these lessons do not apply to them, and why not try subsidize women's football and maybe be good there? As it turns out, not even that is that easy to do, with only one win against Haiti, which is even more amateurish and definitely less wealthy than China. Turns out that the CCP is still incompetent to one of these things. I mean, getting football right as an authoritarian regime, pretty much everyone was able to do it. I mean, Egypt was able to do it, both under Muslim Brotherhood and prior to that under Hosni Mubarak, and today under the military junta. Zimbabwe was able to do it, the Soviet Union, of course. Saudi Arabia was able to do it, the UAE is able to do it. Pretty much everyone has been able to do it in some way, shape, or form, decently enough. But for some reason, the CCP still can't find a way to manage this issue. So it's really quite interesting, and it shows the inherent limitations of the CCP when it comes to propaganda. And this is highly important to note, because from our perspective as, well, rivals of China, basically, we could use this this incompetence at the end of the day of the CCP. We could use it to our advantage. Now, if I were a thinker in a strategic think tank somewhere in Europe, I would find a way to get the football ultras on my side on the China question, because that will matter quite a bit in the next several years. But then again, that would imply that on the Western side, there are people who actually think in these terms and think of propaganda in a holistic manner, rather than in this highly narrow way, the way currently the regime in the West thinks, right? The regime in the West thinks in modular terms. So, there's the propaganda on TikTok, there's the propaganda on X, there's the propaganda on Facebook and all the others. There's street level propaganda, then there's Russian or on propaganda on Telegram, and when they think of these things modularly. But in thinking this way, they started to lose sight of other avenues of power and other avenues of agitation, such as the stadia. Now, lucky for us, China is not better at this either. In fact, they're worse at it. And as a result, For now, anyway, we're lucky, I suppose. And one of the reasons why I bring this up is because if we're serious about countering China wherever we can, well, even in this particular newspaper, we see, there you go, empowering Latin America and Caribbean. US-led West cannot hold back the aspirations of the global South and its people, as if the US-led West even tries that, but whatever. Now, anyone who's ever been to Latin America or has followed a sports channel more seriously for more than 10 minutes knows that football is huge in Latin America, like really huge. So, and China is unable to come up with an answer in this department, period, because, well, because they don't do that. They're just not. It's not their thing. So, if we're serious about combating Chinese influence wherever we can, getting our football story right and taking advantage of CCP's inability to do this, that could help quite a bit. But then again, that would require our elites to think strategically, and as we know, they've shown quite a lot of incompetence in this department and in their ability to think strategically. So, basically, there is no conspiracy. Everyone is just trying to get their best all for their side, and there is no coordination. Nobody is in charge. And in some ways, we're lucky they're that stupid. Anyway, I hope you like this one. This one was a little bit shorter. The next one is going to be a little bit more controversial. So with all that being said, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative. Cheers!